Welcome back to the Nassau Hockey Podcast. I'm John Zella. James is not able to be with us today, so we're going to jump right into our interview with Zach Andrews, better known as Stats by Zach. Thanks for joining NHP today.
Of course, happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Excited
Tell
to
me
talk some numbers.
Yeah, and we're very interested. We're very happy that you're here and can probably enlighten us a little bit on this subject. And you've had a lot of great Twitter threads and done a great job in explaining some of these things. And you've been mentioned on a lot of other shows, and I think that's great for the Islanders community. You're becoming the stats person, I think, and I think it's very cool and probably a much needed specific thing that our community needs. How did you get started with this, and why? Did you see the void and the need for it in the Islanders community and then just kind of jump on it and you had an interest?
So I'm in grad school right now, actually doing computer science, and I've always been interested in sports stats, and I've always loved hockey. And I realized, there are a few of the big name guys like Evolving Wild and Micah Blake McCurdy, the Hockey Viz and stuff. But besides a lot of the big guys and like a few middle guys, hockey stats is a pretty decently untapped market compared to like baseball, basketball, especially soccer too. And so it was always something that I kind of figured like, hey, untapped market a little. I love doing this stuff. Like, let me give it a shot. And then after last semester, so my fall semester, I realized I was like, well, I have a pretty good, skill set now. I think I should probably, I might just give this a try. And then I made the account and started just tweeting out the first charts I made were the ones that I tweet out after every game, which is like the animated shots of the game. So that was like the first one that I made. And I was like, oh, well, this is actually, pretty useful. I can build off this, and just kind of grew from there.
What has it taught you about the game that you didn't know or you weren't able to learn from just watching it? Because there must have been something there that you saw from other stats and charts and saying that there must be something to this. And I may as well, you kind of narrowed in on the Islanders. If you're for those watching, he has a fisherman jersey in the background. He told me it was Dobson before the show. There must have been something there that you're like, maybe there's something to this. So what has it kind of taught you about the game and more specifically about the Islanders?
Yeah. So, hockey, it's a compare it to like baseball, which is like I guess they kind of call it like a numbers game. Just there's so much about hockey that is very difficult to measure, and in some cases almost impossible to measure. And I think that's what interested me the most, is that it was tougher than baseball. Like baseball, you have a set of outcomes. It's dead set. Like, this many outs, this many people on, this event happened. But hockey, it's a continuous game. And through using the stats that I've made, I've kind of been able to have a better idea of what teams are actually good and what teams are actually bad. And then one of the bigger things is figuring out which teams are good but kind of fluky, and which teams are bad but you can expect to get better. One of my biggest tools is my expected goals model, which, for those not familiar with expected goals, the very, very general idea is that every shot the expected goals model makes it so that every shot isn't weighted the same, right? You think about like a shot taken from 80 feet away from the net, that shouldn't count the same as a shot that's taken 1 foot away from the net. So the whole idea is to kind of just get smarter with weighing down shots like that. And so through that, I've been able to see like, okay, this team's taking a lot of good shots, this team's taking a lot of bad shots, but team A, they're doing a lot better than the other team, but we can expect them to regress because they're taking worse shots. Just general stuff like that.
It's more specifically about the Islanders. What do the overall stats tell you about the Islanders this season? Because I think we've seen a tale of a lot of different teams, game to game, period to period. I think there's, aside from the numbers, I think there's something between the ears. There's a clear issue with leadership and focus, and there's something, I think, between the coach and the rest of the team that something's not connecting. The wires are loose or something. But on the numbers side, What are you seeing kind of broad strokes from the club?
I mean, I personally like to. I People talk about like the eye test versus analytics. I do love to combine them. I think it's not smart to use one without the other. I think they work really well together. And I mean, the analytics are showing what the eye test shows. I mean, we're the third worst team on the power play in terms of goals for per game. That's just the one of the big things about us. And then I mean, on even strength play, we're a pretty average team. We're a little above average on my expected goals for per game or per 60 metric, and a little below average on expected goals against per 60. So what those stats tell us is that on average, we're generating about a little more than league average expected goals per game. Only in even strength play. That's an important distinction with these. We talk about even strength play a lot because that's when the battlefield's even, so to speak. But I mean, they're an average team in that aspect. And then I mean, Ilya Sorokin per my metrics is probably the best goalie in the league right now. It's very tight between him and Olmark. I mean, you ask five different people, you'll probably get five different answers on who could be the Vesna winner there. But I think we're looking at like a pretty decent team in offense and defense metrics, and then Sorokin kind of just pushes them over the edge.
So when you and this is this wasn't in our little prep notes because I didn't want you to be unprepared. I think when you say Sorokin and Olmark and thinking about how different the Boston Bruins are, and frankly, just and we saw in that I believe it was a 6-2 loss on a Saturday. Um, and I remember I was working at the bar and it was a miserable afternoon. A bunch of Boston Bruins fans there, really, really giving it to me. But in thinking about how those teams are so different than one another, I'm thinking about even just the strength of defense in front of the goaltenders. Are there metrics yet? Obviously we have things like giveaways, things like I don't know. Of course, he's still relevant, but there's high danger chances against when certain players are on the ice and possession and all of that. I feel like there's something there when you're talking about the Islanders are a decent team. What is does it take into account that type of thing? And like Olmark versus Sorokin as a more specific example, is Sorokin that much better because the defense is that much worse in front of him? So is like are we just not there yet in terms of the things that we can put together as far as that's concerned?
Oh no, this is actually a debate I've seen going on Twitter recently. Sorokin is absolutely facing a tougher workload than Olmark is. So just a little background about and I can tweet out this chart later too. Goal saved above expected is literally just expected goals minus goals allowed. So Sorokin is, I have it up here. Sorokin's number one in the league at 44 per my metrics. So that means he's faced however many expected goals, let in this many goals, and goal saved above expected for him is 44. So the higher that is, the better the goalie is because obviously if you're letting in less goals than the expected goals you're facing, that means you're doing a pretty good job of stopping the ones that you are facing. So he's the highest in that stat. But another stat that I recently introduced was expected goals goals per expected goal. So the idea with that is to kind of standardize the workload for the goalies, because you think about if one goal. I mean, this is the pretty much exact use case that we can use this for. Is that Sorokin's facing a really tough workload and he's doing really well with it, but Olmark shouldn't be punished because he's facing an easier workload. So, like I said, Sorokin's at like a 44, goal saved above expected. Olmark is at a 36, but that's just because he's facing an easier workload than Sorokin. But now, if we talk about goals per expected goal, Olmark is leading Sorokin. I have it written down here. I think it's so Olmark is letting in 0.69 goals per one expected goal faced, and Sorokin is letting in 0.73. So it's not a huge difference, but that does kind of answer the question of, okay, well, is Sorokin's numbers just kind of good because he's facing this workload and doing well with it? Or is it once you standardize them, you can kind of see like, all right, maybe Olmark is a little better in that stat, but I think it can go either way personally when talking about the two of them.
It's interesting. I feel like that's the answer to some of the questions about what is an expected goal, and I think it gives it a little bit more depth than I think a lot of people that are I don't want to say anti-analytics, but just either don't understand it or I mean, frankly, it's above my head. This is absolutely helping. But I remember I was listening to another podcast and they were like, expected by whom? Who are the goals expected? And I think it's really, really funny. That was on the Steve Dangle podcast. And obviously they were joking because I think they understand it to a degree as well. But it resonated with me because I think that's they're satirizing the comments, like, who are the goals expected? What does that mean? And I think and this might take a little bit to catch on, and you're probably deeper into this, but goals per expected goal is interesting, so that you can see it's not just this 44 goals saved above expected
Yep.
is difficult, but when you talk about the actual goals that were let in, then you can start to kind of provide it's just more contextualized
Yeah. I
that
mean,
way.
the best way that I kind of explain expected goals, like to people that, because it is like the first time. I mean, you see these phrases thrown around Twitter all the time, and you're like, well, what does this even mean? Like, what are we talking about? Expected goals. The best, like the easiest way that I try to explain it is that every shot is assigned a probability between 0 and 1 of being a goal. And there are other, like, it could go deeper, saying like, yeah, it's technically you're not factoring in goalie play, you're not factoring in shooter talent, and then you can, because you can use these metrics to evaluate the two after. But the easiest way to explain it is that every shot has between 0 and 1 probability of being a goal. So a shot that's near 1, that's obviously going to be a shot that's really good, because a 1 probability is a 100% chance that it's a goal. So it's kind of just adding more context. So if you're looking at shots on goal, or Fenwick or Corsi or whatever it is, you can set all those shots are weighted just 1, like it's a shot. But once you use expected goals, you're saying, all right, well, now we can kind of get an idea of shots that were better, shots that were worse, closer to the net, whatever context it might be. But it just helps add context to the shot, and that's just on the lowest level that you can. I mean, you can break it into individual stats and team stats and everything, but that's just kind of the baseline of it.
That's interesting. I'm gonna have to listen back to this, I think, which is always
Yeah,
really hard for me, but I'll have to listen back and maybe take some notes because I think you're doing a good job in explaining it and definitely the additional numbers add some context and obviously the conversation
yeah,
helps. Um, Diving into more specific players on the roster and kind of digging through some of this because I think that's ultimately where people are trying to find a player's value, especially when they're playing poorly. They're either trying to double down and say this player is actually shit, and the eye test is telling me this, the numbers are telling me this, or and that would be a Josh Bailey who I want to talk about first, or on the other end where there's a player providing value and you can argue whether or not that's worth the money that they're going to be paid because they're not being paid this season, but going to be paid and player like Bo Horvat, who's clearly adding value and has done something for the team, even if he's a little snake betting outside of Casey Cizikas giving him the alley oop the other night against the Devils. So I want to start with a player like Josh Bailey. Are his numbers, and I did, so this is a little cheating. It's a little bit of a leading question because I did see some charts out there before I wrote this question, or, I knew you were coming out for a couple days. So I wrote this question a while back, but are Josh Bailey's stats as bad as the eye test makes him out to be at this point in his career? And I'm going to add a layer to this question. How much has he declined since even just last year or throughout this season? Or if that's something you have, has he declined like this season in the way that I think people are seeing him not play as well anymore?
so in short, the answer is yes. His numbers are as bad as the eye test would serve. They're as bad as people are talking about. Um, so a metric I'm going to be talking about a lot going into this part is expected goals for percentage. So what that is when a player's on the ice, a certain amount of expected goals happen between both teams, and the expected goals for percentage is the percent of those expected goals that belong to the player's team, like that we're talking about. So just talking about Josh Bailey here right now, they kind of tried him out again in that game versus Buffalo, and he had a 6% expected goals for percentage, which is one of the worst I've seen this season. So the way to think about that is when he was on the ice, only 6% of the expected goals that happened while he was on the ice belonged to the Islanders. So that's pretty terrible. That pretty much just means that Buffalo was kind of beating up on us whenever he was on the ice. And that's just at the micro level. I mean, macro level too. He is really not having a good year analytically at all. I think he has the highest expected goals allowed per 60 on the team. So again, when he's on the ice, teams are piling on the expected goals, and that's at even strength. But that's obviously when most of the game is played, when he's playing the most.
And he's been up and down the lineup, right? This
Yeah.
isn't just he's playing with really good players and
Yes.
something, again, if he's playing with Bo Horvat right now and he's not scoring goals, it's gonna be really hard, right?
Yeah.
That's not gonna do you any favors. It doesn't help that he could have been on any line against in the Sabres game, and I guess you can look at shots for and all that kind of stuff, or shots against and everything, and kind of say like, well, he had a good game. I had one of those recently. I wasn't on in his beer league. I wasn't on the ice for any. It was like a 7-6 game. I wasn't on the ice for any goals against, and I didn't
Yep.
feel like, and that's like super. I mean, in beer league, they're racking up goals. So in a game like that, again, where you're playing with a line that isn't scoring any goals, you're also bad in without without trying to find another word for that. You're not playing well. um, how do we contextualize that? Right? Because like, he could have a bad game, and you kind of have to look in, as you said, like microstats, giveaways. Um, I don't know how it's. There's no actual grit per 60, but he plays an awful lot. Very well, let's call it a passive game at this point. I think he's always played like this, but how do we how can we further contextualize, I guess, just how bad and we'll go on the other side of this too next with Bo Horvat's impact, so we can, compare the two and how the stats kind of
Yeah.
influence that.
Yeah.
How do you contextualize just how bad he's playing right now?
So a lot of I mentioned that there were bigger name stat accounts out there, and what they actually do. I mean, you've probably seen like Evolving Wild or Evolving Hockey. They have like the charts where there's a bunch of bars. They're called the Rap'em charts, and they have player cards too. And what they try to do in these cards is they try to do what you're talking about, is really isolate players and their impact on the game. Because I mean, when we're looking at a stat like expected goals percentage, it is weighed also by line mates a little. But I haven't personally gotten into the world of isolating players and making like a war metric or anything. But some of the bigger accounts have, and I think they'll probably do it better than I could ever do it. Honestly, I mean, they have a lot more experience doing this, and I'm not ruling it out down the line by any means. But to kind of put it in perspective, using Evolving Hockey's goals above replacement model, he is a 9 overall, and he is in the 38th percentile for defense and 5% for offense, which is very, very bad. And so that what they're trying, I mean, those numbers are him isolated, like himself. Doesn't really have to, or they're trying their best to isolate his play from line mates and stuff. So he is really just not having a good year at all. And you mentioned earlier talking about the change from last year. Last year he wasn't great either. I would say. I mean, it's still been a pretty a little decline from last year, but he wasn't anywhere near the player that we saw a few years ago for really the past 2, maybe 3 years.
Yeah, I think it's hard. I mean, I think a lot of people find it difficult to just think about a few years ago and those runs, and even after last season, it was a really long year after short seasons, but life was just long, and it's hard. Everything's mushed together, so
No, yeah,
I can't really think about Bailey being quite this bad. Now, I have tweets going back, and I just tweeted out one of mine today from the NHP account. How it was like 7 years ago. I said I was like, oh, and all that effort. and a turnover by Bailey. Just like, giving it away. And that's been his MO forever. I wish that there were, and now granted, these kind of stats have been out for a minute, but I wish there was something all those years ago that highlighted this. And I'm surprised. I hear a lot that teams have all these other numbers that we don't have access to, which
Yep.
leads me to believe that they had them before the general public. And I still don't understand how it was happening. He was an all-star. I think we forget that. And he had a ridiculous amount of assists. I can't remember, 40, maybe more than that. I can't even remember.
Oh
Was that
yeah.
17, 18?
Yep.
I mean,
17,
Tavares was
18.
still on the team.
Yeah, they both
I
went to
mean,
the All-Star game.
and I mean, there's a couple of things here. That was a long time ago. It was
Mm-hmm.
5 years
5 years
ago
ago.
at this
Yeah.
point. So, we've seen a serious decline in his play, and um, he's always had holes, and it's been really difficult to watch. And then if so, and what you're saying, and we'll move on to Bo Horvat, if what you're saying is that we not only is he playing really bad this year, but that it's even worse. Like, he's one of the worst players in the league, and he's been being put now. Lambert's been putting between Dufour, Ratu, Bailey, Holmstrom, players either really young that have no business playing with Barzell, or Josh Bailey, who
Yep.
also has no business playing there at this point, and they're bad for different reasons. There's nothing redeeming about Bailey at this point, so it's confusing, and he's I think just a warm body. But we'll move on to Bo Horvat, because again, I think Snakebitten got the goal last game. What's his impact been? I didn't want to split up with and without Barzell, because obviously it's going to be really good with Barzell.
Yeah.
They were
Yeah.
clicking, but I wanted to look at his overall impact on the team. In Has he played 15 games yet? I can't even remember. It's really just been March, but he's played a number of games, and
Yeah.
so
I think he's at like 22, 23 maybe.
20. Yeah, wow. Okay, so
Yeah.
way more than that. Um, what's his impact been on the Islanders since he's got here?
He's been great. He's been exactly what was advertised out of him. Right when we traded for him, I saw a lot of Canucks fans saying, and analytics too, saying, this guy is great on offense, not so great on defense, and that's what we're getting out of him right now. When he's on the ice, we're generating three. What is it? I have it up right here. 3.1 expected goals per 60, which is good for fifth on the Islanders. So far this entire season. So he's been really good. Defense, not exactly so much. And then I think one of his biggest features, honestly, I mean, he's almost 60% in the faceoff circle, by far the best on the Islanders. Um, he's been awesome. I did the whole thread on him. He obviously was on that 10 or 11 game goal drought or whatever. And the big thing was he came into the Islanders on an incredible shooting bender. His shooting percentage was through the roof. It very obviously wasn't going to be sustainable. Guys just don't shoot at the levels that he was at. No one expected him, obviously, to regress to shooting 0% over 10 games. But like I said in the thread, he's still generating these great chances. He's still putting up great numbers. I mean, in terms of slot chances and house chances and expected goals and everything. It's just he was snake bitten. That's really all it was. And I mean, it's one thing to harp on a guy if he's out there like quote unquote public skating. He's not doing anything, but he was generating really good chances. And I mean, he did score one, like albeit an empty net goal, but I think that one's going to really start to get him going because he's been really good, and I think we'll start to see some of those goals fall in soon again.
Are the underlying numbers, and I think you partially answered this question, but I just want to be more explicit with it. Are the underlying numbers the same so far with the Islanders, given the small sample size, as they were with Vancouver before the trade? So which would have been maybe 40 games or high 30s.
Yeah, I mean the biggest thing is that shooting percentage. That. I mean, when he was with Vancouver, I don't know the exact number, but he was shooting maybe like I could like 30%, maybe 20 something percent. and
Right.
obviously that's not sustainable. Like that's going to go down. But besides that, I'm not seeing a huge dip in any sort of underlying number for him, at least according to my metrics. He was great with them, and he's been great with us too. Um, and a lot of people are confused maybe about why we would give him such a big contract, and you see a lot of people saying, "Oh, like he's getting 8 million, but he was just lucky he was on that big shooting percentage streak." But besides the shooting percentage, I mean, he's still a really good hockey player. Like I mentioned his faceoffs earlier, that's huge. He's still really good on offense. He's going to help with this lineup no matter where you put him. So I think, I mean, it can't be stated enough just how good this guy is, and I really do think he's going to be worth every dollar that he's getting in within the next 8 years.
I think it's interesting. Um, I don't think it's a coincidence that when he got to the team, obviously he brought a lot of stability, and I think that brings a lot of confidence to the rest of the club. But
Yes,
I think additionally, I don't think it's a coincidence that his leadership, like he showed up, and the team was focused. They
yes,
were.
exactly.
I think, and that's kind of beyond the analytics. And I was going to talk to James about that a little bit, but he wasn't able to be here tonight. I don't think that that's a coincidence that the team kind of got it together. Now, I don't understand the Columbus and the Buffalo losses in that context, and even a few other losses during that time. But they've definitely been able to get up 4 games. And to close out Horvat really quickly, in 49 games, he was shooting 21.7%, which is crazy. His
Yes,
career
that's
high was 17.5%, and that was the season before. And he's definitely shooting the puck as much with the Islanders as he was with Vancouver. I think that's where
yep,
you'd be able to tell us, oh, well, he's actually shooting less high danger shots than he was in Vancouver, just because based on Islanders get a lot less shots on goal, and they're at times a perimeter team. But he has 109 shots so far in 23 games, and he had 215 in 49 games. Not a math guy. It's about half as far as I'm concerned,
yep,
and pretty, in the same. And so the it's looking like he's not doing much different outside of maybe where he's taking those shots from
yep,
necessarily. So it's interesting, and by the end of the season, obviously he'll play about half the season with each. I'd love to see the breakdown on high danger versus low danger shots for, and maybe what those results were. And obviously, 21.7% wasn't ever going to be sustainable.
never. Yeah,
He's in the mid teens. He even and that was the last few seasons were the mid teens.
Natsman Hockey is brought to you by DraftKings. The biggest tournament in college basketball is underway, and the action is just getting started on DraftKings Sportsbook, one of America's top-rated sportsbook apps. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 on any pregame money line and score $150 in bonus bets if your team wins. Plus, combine multiple bets for a shot at an even bigger payout. DraftKings will be featuring parlays and odds boosts all tournament long, so be sure to check out the DraftKings Sportsbook app every day to see what they have in store. So download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and sign up with code THPN. Right now, new customers can bet $5 on any pregame moneyline bet and get $150 in bonus bets if your team wins, only at DraftKings Sportsbook with code THPN. Minimum age and eligibility restrictions apply. See show notes for
In
details.
one of the recent episodes, James and I were talking about. I made a comment. We're talking about Sebastian Aho, and I made the comment, which partially made me think of bringing you on the show. Thinking about Sebastian Aho as this is probably not a fair comparison, but I'm curious. Sebastian Aho as a Devon Taves replacement, right? I think we were all really unhappy. I think still unhappy. And he's on a very different club than Sebastian Aho. But this year, Colorado's gone through some injury troubles, and it might be a little more comparable as far as those two players are concerned, not the teams. Um, is Tell me about Sebastian Aho's influence, and is he close to a Devon Taves replacement? Is he on track for that eventually? Does it look like it's trending in that direction?
I I have some pretty interesting thoughts about Aho. I don't think he's on the level of Taves right now. I don't know if that's something he can reach. I personally think Taves is honestly one of the best defensemen in the league right now. when we traded him, I was really upset. I mean, just from his statistical profile, he was awesome for us. And I mean, I guess they had to clear space somehow at the time, but not a guy that I love to see going. I don't know if Aho can reach that level. But I
Because Taves
honestly,
came out of nowhere, if you
yes,
remember. He
yeah,
absolutely came out of nowhere. This is partially me just trying to make myself feel better and
yep,
thinking about in the role that he's playing and his skating ability. And again, this is
yeah,
eye test only and not looking at much else.
mm.
Mostly me just trying to make myself feel better, and hopefully we can just move forward as a defensive group. But continue.
So Sebastian Aho gets a whole lot of hate on Twitter, on anywhere that's talking about the Islanders. People are not ever happy with him. He has a very good statistical profile this year, and I think that's when people are they start to say. I mean, there's always a debate: are these stats even real? Like, should we trust them? And this is one where people see them and they're like, oh, these stats suck. Like the player cards, they all suck. Everything, but he has the lowest expected goals per 60 when he's on the ice at even strength on the team, among regular defensemen. I mean, he's played something 1,000 something minutes of even strength hockey, and he is suppressing shots really well. But
This is shots against, not shots
yes,
for.
shots
Okay.
against. He's helping
Okay.
suppress shots really well. And I mentioned it earlier. I do like to blend eye test and analytics together, and I do understand why people are upset with him. I mean, he falls over 5 times a game. There are a lot of decision-making things that I personally think are a little off with him still. But on a macro level, he has honestly been one of our better defensemen this year. Just from a pure analytics standpoint, I think the statistics, the analytics, everything kind of favor him a lot more than the general population does.
Interesting. Well, I don't want to dive too far because I'm sure we can get a whole tangent on just on how he's not Devon Taves, and it'll make everybody upset. So we'll move on. I want to talk about Palmieri's resurgence
Definitely.
because especially the last few games in particular, um, he does have that extra level, and I think recently we're seeing the player that we thought we were getting when we traded for him. Right? I don't.
Absolutely.
I think in that he on a playoff run. These years
He was
are
on a
all
playoff run when we lost to Tampa in 7 games. That
right.
was the year
So
we traded for him.
even then, I don't think we were seeing this player.
No.
And last year was disappointing. He was disappointed. He did turn on the second half of the season. He was injured parts of this season. It was a little scary. But
Yep.
this is the player I think that we were all expecting. And
100%. Yeah.
and it does. And I know one of the questions I have is this sustainable for him, or is he just kind of running with the extra time and he's just he's benefiting from a Brock Nelson who he could be pretty silky at times, and he's himself a goal scorer. He's playing a little bit with Zach Parise. That doesn't, I don't think it's every single shift or every single game, but obviously he's got a lot of speed and tenacity, and that's something that Palmieri for his goal scoring ability can be a tough player to play against. He doesn't shy away from hits and different things. Might be the Long Island in him that he just has an attitude. But is this what we can expect from him, or is this what we should be expecting from him, or is he just kind of pushing himself to in another gear right now?
Yeah, I mean, I have it written down here. He's by far been, I think, our most valuable player. Last 6 games, he has 10 points, and underlying numbers too. He's paired it with a 60% expected goals for percentage at even strength. He is playing really good hockey, and the line, Engvall, Nelson, Palmieri, that line has to stay forever. They are absolutely incredible right now. I can't say enough good things about him. I do think this is something that we can expect from him. You talk about if maybe it's just like kind of the next man up mentality, like Barzal goes down and a lot of different guys have stepped up, and he's one that stands out to me that absolutely has stepped up. But I mean, even going back more, I mean, it's been since he returned from his injury, honestly. I really do think he's been one of our best players. I don't have the exact numbers now, but I know he's been shooting the puck a ton and just been absolutely incredible. Just an awesome player, and I do think that this is very sustainable for him. Just I think he kind of needed just a little hot streak like this, and all the numbers tell me that he could probably keep this up. So I'm looking forward to watching him and that line play.
It's interesting that you say now. I'm forgetting Engvall's on this team. Slightly taller, Brock Nelson.
Brock
Somebody said
Nelson.
that. I think yeah. It just is a longer neck. It's incredible. It's like a foot long. It's crazy. And it's interesting. Palmieri is not as smooth of a player as maybe his stats would lead you to believe, and maybe the category, like his comparisons and other players in the league. He's a little clumsy out there at times. And it's even Parise looks like this sometimes. They're just going ham out there. They are going balls to the wall, and I can appreciate that. Like the eye test is telling me they're trying really hard, and sometimes I forget what podcast I was listening to that yes they're trying really hard, but is that just because they're inefficient, or is it because they need to do it and there's actual results? And I think it's interesting. He's trying really hard. Parise's trying really hard, and there you see the results. Cizikas is another player, which
Oh yeah.
I saw, and I didn't put this in here, but in our notes, but maybe you know a little bit about it. His numbers, his underlying numbers, Casey Cizikas, that is, his numbers aren't great, but he tries and he looks like he's making an impact out there. And that might be a good example for us in the future to kind of dive into a little bit more in the difference between why Zach Parise and Casey Cizikas look like they're doing the exact same thing out there. Yet one it has 20 goals and the other has like 5,
Yep.
maybe. I don't even know. It's not a lot. It's not good. Can you speak to that? I know we're going off script a little bit here. Can you speak to that a little bit?
I think it might have to do a little bit of the role they're playing. I mean, I do think that you are right in that it does look like that they're doing the same thing out there. I see a little more of I, I don't really know. It's tough. I mean, Parisi, I do have this number. It's that he stepped up huge offensively since Barzal's been out. He's at 10 points, 6 goals, 4 assists. He's been absolutely awesome. And I don't know if maybe it's something with a role there, but I think he just might have just maybe a little more offensive talent than Cizikas, and maybe more like, hey, like go score while Cizikas, you kind of try to go, four checkers. I don't know exactly what it is, and I don't
I
really
mean,
have.
Cizikas had one of these years, right? If you
Yeah,
remember, did he have? He actually hit 20 goals. Yeah, maybe it was 17 or something like that. A number. Now that may have been a long time ago at this point. Yeah, 20 goals, 18, 19.
yep,
So, and then he's more of a 7 to 10 goal scorer. And for Zach Parise, you can go, well, maybe his shooting percentage is high. It's at 12.4%, which during his decent seasons, even in Minnesota, he's kind of shot there his entire career. The last 2 seasons were more of an anomaly, frankly. And
yeah,
last season was like a percent and a half down on a bad Islanders team, but he still has 15 goals. Like
yeah,
he's at 21 now, which and he still has a number of games to go, 7 games to go here. For Zizekas, this is definitely a down year shooting percentage wise, but yeah, I think the two of them, that it probably requires a deeper discussion. They look like they're doing
definitely,
the
yeah,
same. They're doing the same thing out there. Um, I want to talk about Noah Dobson because his production, especially since the beginning of the season. So he had a really strong second half of last season and a good maybe few months to start the year with the Islanders, and then it's been quiet. What's his impact been? Is he still effective in what the Islanders are trying to get him to do? And this is, he's on the power play and the quarterback in the power play, and the power play's been shit. Some of that strategy, some of it's the players need to get their head out of their ass. But what's Dobson's role in all that? Maybe that's part of this question. And is he still as effective in his role as the Islanders need him to be?
yeah. I mean, I personally, I don't know if he should be quarterbacking this power play anymore. he's another guy who with the eye test is lining up exactly with what the analytics say. Terrible on defense, but he's shooting the puck a lot. I mean, there's probably like 2 or 3 times a game where I'm watching him and I'm like, what are you doing? Like, why? Bad decisions, like just playing pucks wrong. And the stats are telling us that too. I mean, he's letting up, what is it? 2.8 expected goals against per 60 when he's on the ice, which is, I believe, the second highest on the team among defensemen. Yeah. I mean, and when I watch him on the power play too, I just don't think he's really fit for it right now. I don't think it's a permanent change to get him off and just maybe like refresh it a little and just kind of try someone new out there. But I just don't know if I don't know if he's out of it or what, but I just don't think he's fit for the power play right now. I do still think he's valuable. I think it's valuable to have a guy that can shoot pucks at the net all the time. Right shot defenseman, that's good. But there are absolutely things he has to improve upon in his game for him to really be the player that we all thought he would be.
I think what's interesting is he had 13 goals last season and exactly 13 goals this season. And he's 8 points off, his career high. He's a short career, but last year he had 51 points. Now he's 43. Shooting percentage is almost identical. It's 0.1 off from last season. And he's got 8 games to go. So it wouldn't be surprising for him to just get, a point a game or, averaging a point a game the rest of the way and have the exact same stats. But it doesn't look like he's as effective. And I think this is, I'm using hockey reference just for some possession metrics. His Corsi for percentage is at 57.3, which is on the good side of things.
Yeah.
And they don't dive into some of those things, some like that you're speaking about, or at least I don't understand what any of these other charts are. But so you're saying he's allowing more goals per game, even though when he's on the ice, his teammates, between him and his teammates, they're shooting the puck more. So they have more possession in theory, but they're allowing more goals. And that, how do you isolate that? Like you're talking about Josh Bailey. How do we isolate what the problem is there? Because clearly they're owning the puck, but the other direction, and we saw it the other night. Was that Dobson or was that Pulak? A breakaway. I can't remember. They pinched and pretty much gave up. I was a shorthanded goal.
Yeah. Sure.
And how do we isolate that? Like, what's happening there? So they have the puck, but they're allowing more. When they don't, they're just allowing a goal.
Yeah, I mean I think what it really comes down to is defensive play right there. I mean, they're letting up high quality chances, or Dobson in particular, when he's on the ice, the team's letting up high quality chances. And I mean, as good as Sorokin is, if you face so many of them, it's going to be tough to stop every single one of them. So I think that's what it comes down to is just even if it seems like they might be possessing the puck more, shooting more, if you're letting up really bad chances a lot, then it's going to be tough to stop all those. And so I think it really just boils down to poor defensive play.
It's interesting. I'd love a comparison at a different time. Dobson and his defense partners this year, which have been a number of them, and last year, because his numbers on the whole seem to be the same. So there's something else kind of happening here. His PDO is almost identical. It's 1 point lower than last year. Team on ice save percentage identical. So there's something going on here that it may just be situationally bad, close games, and that's kind of raising the and maybe that's a future advanced stat. It's one thing to allow a goal in a 5-1 game, right? And that is going to change your underlying numbers for the game. But if it's like a game-winning goal against or game-tying goal against in the last number of minutes, that should change the value of what that goal against is, or for, like, if it's on the other side of things. Like, I wonder that about Dobson. Is it that they're trusting him and they shouldn't? And it's just situationally, he's not letting in more goals per se, but situationally in a game that's closer, he's allowing that goal.
Mhm.
That I wonder in the future if, unless that already exists, because I'm not as plugged in. I wonder if that's something, because that might be it. What I'm looking at is are numbers that are not really that different. Granted,
Yeah.
whatever, for all the great hockey reference, I do not know how effective they are as advanced stats. To me, they do the trick. Um, but I wonder if there's anything there in the future.
Yeah.
Uh, Staying on defense for a second, and just a younger player, and we have just a couple more here, and then I'll let you go. Um, Islanders defense, we're talking about, in the offseason, do we re-sign Mayfield? Um, where do you put Aho? What does the future of the Islanders kind of defensive core look like? And Bolduc's gotten a shot with Sebastian Aho out of the lineup. Very small sample size. I did like what I saw from him earlier in the season in his little stint, and now he's back. A couple bad turnovers here and there. Young player, just working it out. A little grease on the end of his stick or something. But what are we seeing from Samuel Bolduc so far, and how does it compare, even with the small sample size, to some of his peers on the back end?
Yeah, no, I've been a fan of him ever since he played first game for us this year. It has been a small sample size, obviously, but I think he's been absolutely awesome in the minutes that he has had. And again, going back to eye test analytics, when I watch him too, I'm impressed with him. I mean, defense is a very hard position to play, and I think with the role that he's had, he's handled himself super well. And like you mentioned, I don't know how this defense is constructed next year. I'm sure it'll be very similar to this year. I mean, give or take Mayfield, Aho, whatever. But yeah, I could see him getting minutes next year. The big stat I have on him is that he has the second best goals allowed per 60 on the team, or the second best. He's actually, with no time on ice cutoff, he's only behind Parker Wotherspoon, who I also thought has been pretty good for us this year. But he's only allowing 0.92 goals per 60 when he's on the ice. So that's really good. But if we look at expected goals, which is probably a better evaluation because that takes out goaltender play, um, he is at what is he? 50% expected goals for percentage, and a 2.8 expected goals allowed per 60, which is still really good for a young defenseman. It just might not reflect the actual goals number, but I think he's been super good in his minutes so far.
So he's played 10 games tonight. As we're recording this, they're gonna drop the puck in a few minutes here. Um, in 10 games, he has a lot more offensive zone starts than defensive zone. So they're sheltering him a little bit. I'm
Yep.
sure he's not playing nearly as many minutes, rather, as the rest of the lineup, and that's kind of to be expected, given that they need to roll their defensemen a little bit. I think with Pulak and Pelech, who's back together now, on a more regular basis, they roll them out a little bit, but they really, everyone gets their fair share. I don't know. Um, Again, eye test versus actual numbers, and these aren't even advanced analytics. Um, Average time on ice, it's actually Adam Pelech, but it's Scott Mayfield, and then Pulak and Dobson. So everyone's kind of getting around the 20-ish minutes or a little bit more.
Yep.
Aho is actually on the lower side, which is interesting, in the 16, 17-minute range.
And
And then
Pellick, I mean, he played 25 minutes the other night. 20 something minutes of even him, actually, someone I wanted to talk about. He's been probably our best defenseman the past 5 games. Not a lot of people I've seen talking about it, but he's been absolutely incredible recently. I think in
yeah,
his past,
former All-Star. I mean, it
yeah,
doesn't speak to, he has some silky shootout moves. And every
and
once in a while he pulls it out. But yeah, on the
yeah,
defensive end, it's easy to point to him as the best Islanders defenseman.
yeah, and I know. I mean, he definitely. It's definitely fair to say he's had ups and downs this year. Probably a little more than we're used to with him. But I mean, the past 6 games, he's had a 63% expected goals for percentage, and even strength play. I mean, just playing very incredible hockey. The only game he had under 50% expected goals percentage was against New Jersey, where most of the team got caved in terms of expected goals. But I mean,
especially in the
he's
second period.
yeah, yeah. No, but he's been awesome. He's been someone that I don't think of recent has been getting really enough love, at least from what I've seen myself.
Very quickly, the last three players here, and again, I appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course.
Um, you had a good thread about Pierre Engvall, so I want to go through that first, and then against our new following that our darling Hudson Fashing, who's kind
Oh
of
yeah,
broken on the scene here, and then we're gonna end on a little bit of a negative note, I think, but that's okay. I feel like that's Islanders country,
of
and then
course.
we'll both get to go watch puck drop against the Washington Capitals here. Pierre Engvall, his impact, is it sustainable? We heard a lot of negative things from Leaf fans kind of coming in here. There's a reason why he was a third round pick. I repeated that on this show. But he's seemingly found his groove. Um, is this the player? And I think he's had 20 goal seasons before. Like this isn't crazy. I think it's just a little bit inconsistent, and maybe just finding. Actually, I apologize. No 20 goal seasons, 15, 16 goals. And he's not really been in the NHL that long. Um, is this who we should expect him to be moving forward?
Um, I will say he is his shooting percentage 23% right now, and even strength play. But my camera's getting messed up here. He's been awesome though. He's been with us for 11 games now. 6 points, 4 goals, 2 assists, 9 slot chances, 18 house chances. Which, for more clarity on what those are, I have a thread on them. It's kind of tough to explain. But I mean, he's been awesome. I think this is honestly maybe the production ticks down just a tad bit, but I mean, I don't know. I think it's fair to say this is around what we're going to see out of him. He's had about a 60% even strength expected goals for percentage when he's on the ice, a 63% goals for percentage. So when he's on the ice, they're putting the puck in the net. And like I was talking about earlier, the Palmieri, Nelson, Engvall line has been just absolutely incredible. They're generating 8.39 goals for per 60 when that line is on the ice, which is absolutely unheard of. Obviously, that number is going to go down a little, but I love the addition so far. I think he's been pretty incredible for us, and I'm excited for him. Hopefully, they can find a way to slot him in this lineup next year.
And as an argument for Hudson Fashing, because we're going to send this segment of the podcast to Lou Lamoriello. I don't know how. We got to put it on a VHS and send it to his office. Or yeah, something, a laser disc or something like that. I'm sure he's got one of those players. Hudson Fashing. What are his, because he as of late, this is a different player than what we saw. We saw an effective player, maybe a Cizikas replacement level kind of player. And then we kind of saw him become Parise level, right? And we talked about the difference between those two players who all three of them look like they're doing the same thing. And Parise looks like, he's obviously the most effective in that. Hudson Fashing doesn't always look pretty when he's out there. He skates like the cinder block, like you'd imagine a cinder block skating down the ice at times. It's very awkward. Who is Hudson Fashing? Who is this player? Especially all of a sudden.
He's incredible. There's very easily a case that he should be on the roster next year. I think, I mean, he's definitely on the roster. I mean, I think he should even be regular next year. So I talked a little bit about the goals above replacement metric that Evolving Hockey has, and he's fifth on the Islanders right now at 6.3 goals above replacement, which is really, really good. I think ahead of him is like Nelson, Aho, a few other guys. He has 10 points since Barzal's been out, so he's another one of those guys that's stepped up. And in the last 10 games, he's leading the team in individual expected goals. So just based on his shots alone, he's leading the team at 2.75. And I mean, he's just, and that's only at even strength too. I mean, he doesn't. I mean, that's really his game. But 12 slot chances, 17 house chances. He's been incredible. I can't advocate enough for this guy to be on the roster next year. I mean, you see a lot of like, I mean, it kind of started off like, oh, this guy's really good. Like he was kind of like a meme a little, like he's playing a really good brand of hockey, but no, he's very much a good hockey player. And if this is production we can get out of him, I hope he stays for a while, honestly.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like I said, this is a tale of two different players. This just
Yeah.
wasn't who was there. And I don't he's off the fourth line, and maybe it's just a role thing. I think you alluded that, with Zizekas and Parise earlier in that discussion. But there's something else. Maybe it's just the confidence. Um, a couple people had really great articles. Steven Rosner and Kevin Kurz both had really good articles about Fashing in his time in Rochester, just an hour and a half down Route 90 and 490 from me, where I am now in Syracuse. And I can understand why you get a little depressed and a little down on yourself playing in the AHL and in this area, and you don't really know anybody. I related to that, obviously not on a professional hockey level, but just kind of in general, being and living in this area, at times anyway. Um, I just wonder if he can kind of not just put it together, but keep it together, or is he going to drop off? And again, if they make the playoffs, they're going to need him. Hopefully, he doesn't run out of steam. Can he be
Oh
this player
yeah.
in the playoffs? I hope he can step up there.
No, I agree. I mean, his story's great too. The Rosner piece was awesome. I love the guy. I think he's earned a spot in this lineup, no question about it. And I really want nothing but the best for him. He just seems like an awesome guy and a great story too. Like you said, grinding it out in the AHL for so many years, and then really getting a chance here and proving that he can play at that level. It's awesome to see.
It's a similar story. Obviously, not comparing some of the specifics, but it's it's the story that I thought Cole Bardreau was going to have with the Islanders a couple years
Yep.
ago, and so it's interesting that they signed Fashing last summer. Um, it's interesting that they even got another shot at it, and he's the winger version of Cole Bardreau, who
Yeah.
I still don't think got the long enough look. They obviously don't need him at center, but there's a couple players that they could really try at this point of, instead of Josh Bailey or our last player, Simone Holmstrom, and on the wing, just to kind of give them Durando, Oshkov, all these players. So it's maybe in the future. I don't know what Bardot's contract looks like, but last player here, Simone Holmstrom. Are his numbers as head scratching and inconsistent as his play indicates? Because there are times he drags the puck like Nelson, and other times he looks like Josh Bailey. And he has 5 goals this season and an assist at 6 points, and he's played all up and down the lineup. I can't understand how his point totals are so low. Are the underlying numbers, again, isolated numbers, and not because he's playing with the Barzal at times, playing with Bo Horvat at times, playing with Nelson at times, and Pajot, whose numbers are also not always really great, despite, again, what we see on the ice, much like Zizekas, probably because they're role players and some of their minutes are eaten up on the penalty kill. But who is Simon Holmstrom? And is this consistent with just kind of who he's been as a player so far in the NHL?
Yeah, what I see out of him is, I mean, he's a good defender. But when you bring up head scratching, I mean, he's played 83 minutes of even strength hockey the past 10 games, and he's leading the team in expected goals for percentage at 63% during that time. So I it seems like his role. I mean, kind of just like maybe a defense forward first type player. But I mean, because in that span, he's letting up only 1.6 expected goals allowed per 60, which is the lowest on the team. So I mean, if you want to say that's him or line mates or whatever, but I mean, when he's on the ice, the Islanders are suppressing shots. Granted, again, a small sample size, and this is only the last 10 games too. but that he said like 5 goals, whatever the point total is. I don't know. I mean, I have him at 1.69 individual expected goals in the last 10 games. So I guess he could show some finishing there. But I mean, so what I'm seeing out of him is he's suppressing shots, and he's helping out on defense actually a pretty good amount, based on all the numbers.
Does he need to shoot the puck more? He's at 14.3%. He's 35 shots in 45 games. Is it a matter now? The shot percentage can go down, but the number of goals can go up. Is it volume? Is he getting low danger shots on goal, and that's why he's not? Because a shot a game isn't really like averaging a shot a game. I don't think is great. I mean, he's not going to be Alex Ovechkin or Bobby Orr or Ray Bork or anything like that, getting crazy shots on goal. But is it just the type of shots that he's putting on net are kind of suppressing his numbers a little bit?
Yeah, it could be. In the last 10 games, I have him at 4 slot chances for, 9 house chances for, and then on the year, 15 slot chances, 41 house chances. So I mean, only 15 slot chances throughout the year obviously isn't great. That's not totally high quality per se, but yeah, it could be if he finds some more better or some better like shot attempts like that a few more could fall. But I don't know. Right now he seems like a defensive guy, and hopefully he does start to put up some better shots, and we can see where his numbers really take him.
Zach, I really appreciate your time. I can't wait to dive in, maybe right before the playoffs or something. If our schedules line up, I think that'd be really great, to kind of dissect the season, the last 10 games or so, their first round matchup, and kind of dive into some of these numbers. We really appreciate, and I know James does, really appreciate you taking the time to join us on the show today.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for having me again. Would love to come back on whenever.
Thanks again to Zach for joining us on today's episode. Please rate, review, subscribe wherever you listen to or watch the show. You can follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube at Aspen Hockey. You can find James' work at the Fourth Period, and make sure you sign up for and read Isles Fix, an excellent curated Islanders newsletter. And in lieu of James being on the show today, until next time, let's go Isles.